What's better than spending billions of dollars you don't have? Spending billions of dollars you don't have on someone else's war while your own country can barely afford groceries. Welcome back to Canadian Insights, where we break down the news that makes you wonder if anyone's actually reading the room anymore. Today we're talking about Canada's freshly announced $1.8 billion gift to Ukraine, because apparently when you're running a country with a housing crisis, healthcare shortages, and an economy that's been flirting with recession like it's some kind of twisted romance, the best move is to write another massive check overseas. Mark Carney just dropped this bombshell in Halifax alongside President Zelensky, and honestly, the timing couldn't be more Canadian if it tried. So grab your overpriced coffee, settle in, and let's unpack this fiscal adventure that's got everyone from coast to coast asking the same question: are we the world's most generous broke friend? Let's start with the numbers, because nothing says we've got this under control quite like casually announcing $2.5 billion Canadian dollars in aid when your country's debt-to-GDP ratio is giving financial advisors nightmares. That's $1.8 billion in American money for our friends south of the border who are probably watching this thinking their northern neighbors have completely lost the plot. Mark Carney, our freshly minted Prime Minister, made this announcement standing next to Volodymyr Zelensky in Halifax, which is basically the Canadian equivalent of inviting someone over and immediately offering them your last $20 because you feel awkward about the small talk. The money is economic aid, not military equipment, which means it's going straight into Ukraine's financial bloodstream to help keep their economy from flatlining while they're dealing with the whole existential threat situation. Carney emphasized this cash injection will help unlock financing from the International Monetary Fund, which is fancy diplomatic speak for we're the opening act that gets the bigger players to join the show. It's like being the friend who spots everyone at dinner knowing full well Visa is going to have some thoughts about your choices later. Now before anyone accuses me of being heartless about Ukraine's situation, let's pump the brakes for a second. Nobody's arguing that what's happening in Ukraine isn't tragic, devastating, and worthy of international support. The attack on Kiev that Carney referenced in his announcement is a stark reminder that real people are suffering through an actual war with real bombs and real casualties. Supporting Ukraine isn't inherently wrong, and there's a legitimate argument that democratic nations need to stand together against aggressive authoritarianism or we're all going to have a bad time eventually. The question isn't whether Ukraine deserves help. The question is whether Canada, specifically, in its current economic state, can afford to be this generous while simultaneously telling its own citizens to tighten their belts. It's the geopolitical equivalent of your roommate lending money to a friend in need while the electricity bill is 3 months overdue and you're eating ramen for the 4th night in a row. Noble? Sure. Sustainable? That's where things get spicy. Let's talk about what's actually happening back home, because context is everything when you're analyzing a decision this big. Canadians are dealing with a cost of living crisis that would make a Victorian-era landlord blush. Housing prices in major cities have become so disconnected from reality that first-time homebuyers are basically extinct species at this point. The average rent for a one-bedroom apartment in Toronto or Vancouver could fund a small tropical vacation every single month, except nobody can afford vacations anymore because they're too busy trying to figure out how to eat after paying rent. Grocery bills have skyrocketed to the point where buying cheese feels like a luxury purchase. Our healthcare system is held together with duct tape, prayers, and the heroic efforts of overworked nurses who deserve medals and probably therapy. Emergency rooms have wait times that would make the DMV look efficient. And let's not forget about the infrastructure needs, the climate commitments, the reconciliation efforts with Indigenous communities that require actual funding, not just symbolic gestures, and the general sense that maybe, just maybe, we should fix our own house before we start renovating the neighbor's place 3 streets over. But here's where it gets interesting from a strategic perspective, and this is where you can see the chess pieces moving if you squint hard enough. Mark Carney isn't just some random politician making emotional decisions based on vibes and good intentions. The guy has serious economic credentials. He was the governor of the Bank of Canada, then the governor of the Bank of England, and has been swimming in high-level international finance circles for decades. When someone with that resume announces a massive aid package, there's usually more happening behind the scenes than pure altruism. The comment about unlocking IMF financing is the key here. Canada's $1.8 billion isn't just a standalone gift. It's a strategic domino designed to trigger larger institutional funding from international organizations. In theory, Canada's contribution signals to the IMF and other financial institutions that Ukraine remains a viable investment, which in turn helps Ukraine access much larger credit facilities and loans that keep their economy functional. It's financial diplomacy, and Canada is basically playing the role of the respectable friend who co-signs the loan because their credit score is better. The bet is that this money helps stabilize Ukraine now, prevents a complete economic collapse, and potentially positions Canada as a key partner in whatever reconstruction boom happens down the road. Contracts for Canadian companies, influence in European markets, strengthened relationships with NATO allies, that sort of thing. It's not charity, it's investment disguised as charity. Whether that investment pays off or whether we just spent nearly $2 billion on international goodwill that doesn't translate to tangible benefits for Canadian citizens is the multi-billion-dollar question. The timing of this announcement is also absolutely wild when you consider the political landscape. Mark Carney just became Prime Minister, and one of his first major moves is dropping a massive foreign aid package when domestic issues are screaming for attention louder than a hockey arena during playoff overtime. There's a certain boldness to that decision that's either brilliant strategic positioning or spectacularly tone-deaf depending on your perspective. On one hand, Carney could be establishing himself as a serious international statesman who understands global stability and isn't afraid to make big moves on the world stage. That plays well with certain voters who want Canada to punch above its weight internationally and maintain its reputation as a reliable partner. On the other hand, there's a significant chunk of the population looking at this announcement and thinking, cool story, now do literally anything about my crippling mortgage or the fact that I can't see a doctor without waiting 6 months. The political calculus here is fascinating because Carney is essentially betting that Canadians either support this decision or at least won't punish him for it come election time. It's a high-stakes gamble that assumes voters care more about international solidarity than their own immediate financial pain, which is either inspiringly optimistic or wildly out of touch depending on which focus group you're reading. There's also the uncomfortable reality that Canada has been writing these checks for a while now, and the total bill is starting to look like a phone number with too many digits. This $1.8 billion isn't happening in a vacuum. It's on top of previous military aid, previous economic assistance, previous commitments that have been stacking up since this conflict started. When you add it all together, Canada's support for Ukraine is running well into the billions, plural, with a capital B that stands for maybe we should have a national conversation about priorities. Every dollar sent abroad is a dollar not spent on housing, healthcare, infrastructure, education, or paying down the national debt that's been growing faster than a teenager hitting a growth spurt. And before anyone hits me with the we can do both argument, sure, in theory you can do both. In practice, budgets are finite, political capital is limited, and choices have consequences. Every economist will tell you there's no such thing as a free lunch, and every finance minister eventually has to explain where the money's coming from. Spoiler alert, it's either coming from cutting other programs, raising taxes, or adding to the debt pile that future Canadians get to deal with. None of those options are particularly fun at parties. But let's flip the script for a second and consider what happens if Canada doesn't step up. If democratic nations with functioning economies decide that supporting Ukraine is too expensive or too politically inconvenient, what message does that send? It tells aggressive authoritarian regimes that military expansion and territorial conquest are viable strategies because the international community will eventually get tired of the bill and wander off. It undermines the entire post-World War II international order that's been built on the idea that borders matter and sovereignty isn't just a suggestion. It potentially emboldens other nations to take similar actions because they've learned the lesson that democracies have short attention spans and even shorter tolerance for sustained financial commitment. From that perspective, Canada's contribution isn't just about Ukraine. It's about maintaining a rules-based international system that ultimately benefits everyone, including Canada, by preventing the kind of great power conflicts that turn into world wars and really ruin everyone's decade. The argument is that paying now to prevent bigger problems later is actually the fiscally responsible move, even if it doesn't feel that way when you're watching your grocery bill double. It's the geopolitical equivalent of paying for regular maintenance on your car instead of waiting for the engine to explode on the highway. More expensive upfront, but potentially cheaper than the alternative disaster scenario. So where does that leave us? Standing at a crossroads trying to figure out if we just witnessed strategic brilliance or an expensive mistake that'll haunt us in the history books. Mark Carney's $1.8 billion announcement is either the move of a leader who understands that sometimes you have to invest in global stability even when it hurts, or it's the decision of someone who's so focused on international reputation that he's forgotten to check if the people footing the bill can actually afford it. The truth, as usual, is probably somewhere in the uncomfortable middle. Yes, supporting Ukraine matters. Yes, Canada has legitimate domestic needs that are being neglected. Both things can be true simultaneously, and pretending otherwise is just bad faith arguing. The real question is whether this specific amount, announced in this specific way, at this specific time, represents the right balance between international responsibility and domestic priorities. Reasonable people can disagree on that without anyone being a heartless isolationist or a reckless spendthrift. This is Canadian Insights, and we're going to keep breaking down these stories as they develop because someone needs to ask the uncomfortable questions between the press releases and the political spin. If you found this analysis valuable, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss our next video. We post multiple times daily because Canadian politics moves fast and somebody needs to keep up. Drop a comment below with your thoughts on this aid package. Are you Team International Solidarity or Team Fix Home First? Is there a middle ground that actually works? Let's have that conversation because it's way more productive than just yelling past each other on social media. Share this video with anyone who needs the full context on this story, and if you want to support the channel while we keep bringing you these deep dives, check out the membership options. Until next time, stay informed, stay critical, and remember that the best citizens are the ones who ask questions even when the answers are complicated. See you in the next one.